Hello, my name is Barbara, and welcome to the Comox Valley Unitarian Fellowship. And let's see, we welcome everybody. We welcome you no matter what color you are, no matter what religion you have, no matter what race, what language, what gender, what affection you have. We just are a place where we welcome people who love people. We have a wonderful speaker today, Chrys, and I will let her be introduced later. I will do, we also meet here on the lands of the Comox First Nations, and they've tended to it for tens of thousands of years, and includes the Puntledge, the Sasitla, the Satluth, and the Eekson. I think I got it. And we're very grateful to be on this land. We're going to do a few announcements, very few. We stop for the summer, so you can enjoy this wonderful land. And next Sunday, the 16th, will be our last one. It's a flower service, and you bring flowers to share. We put them in general bouquets, and we take home different flowers. And that will also be the last service for Aaron Morton, who Reverend Aaron Morton is moving to the East Coast, and so he will not be with us next year, but stay for the potluck on the 16th and say goodbye to him. Oh, and two announcements. Okay, who's ready? Well, that's a welcome, and we need people on our team. As you can see, we have two picnics coming up. One on the 23rd of June, which is a Sunday at Kin Park, 12 to 4, with the Comox United. So bring picnic stuff, your frisbees, your whatever. That picnic is on the end, not out near the shelter, but it's on the end where the playground is and the building. So if you're going to need shade, you might want to bring a shade cover and chairs. So then again in July, on the 28th of July, there will be a Unitarian picnic. And we will be out at the shelters where there's a barbecue pit and people do go swimming. And let's see, so that's also 12 to 4. And we welcome you for that. We have one request for any chance for commuting together to the Elliott camp. Come on up, Annika.
August 10th to 4th. The arts.
The Annika is signed up to go to the arts camp in August, 10th to the 14th, and that's in, as most people know, is in Washington State. If anybody here is planning to go or knows of somebody planning to go to that one, see Annika so they can do some carpooling. Okay, great, thanks.
Leo, the fire sign. This is from my friend Michelle Brown's
Michelle Correa Brown's book. You might be sure you read this. Métis writer. This is called A Fragile Defiance. I'm going to read it twice. You need only be the simple expression of the divine intent. That is your life. Your breath, an act of insubordination. To continue breathing is political. Give voice, seditious. Be beautiful, subversive. Every aesthetic has its rules, its strategy, power. Your presence, the message. Think twice. You need only. You need only to be the simple expression. Only the simple expression of the divine intent. The divine intent, that is your life. Your life, your breath, an act of insubordination. An act of insubordination to continue breathing. To continue breathing is political. Political. So give voice, seditious. Be beautiful, subversive. Every aesthetic has its rules, its strategy, power. Your presence, the message. Power, your presence, the message. Think twice. All right, we're gonna need your help. I'm gonna play a tune. This is Big John McNeil. And I need your help doing something like this. I need a boom chuck. So it's a heel slap, 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 heel slap. 2, 3, and 4. With that, welcome Chrys Temple.
Story.
Yeah.
The slide.
What story? There's a slide? Okay.
It's, at this point in time, we often have a children's story, which we haven't had really all this year because we haven't had any children. But this is a story for all
This one?
ages. Metis like me. By Tasha Hildeman and Risa Hugo. Are you Metis like me? I'm making bannock, my family's special recipe. We'll wrap it around sticks and turn it over the fire until it is hot and golden. I am Métis too. I always take bannock for breakfast on the boat. I go fishing early in the morning with my dad before it gets too hot. The water is so still and quiet. Afterwards, my cousin and I pick Saskatoons that grow nearby. I eat almost as many berries as I pick. 2 for the bucket and 1 for me. I love Saskatoons too. They're delicious. Sometimes my grandpa and I find them at the farmer's market and use them in our homemade jam or Saskatoon crisp. My Newcomb and I don't cook together, but we love Métis crafts. My favorite is beading. I make flowers and berries with brightly colored beads, then turn them into earrings or sew them onto my moccasins. I have moccasins too. My auntie made them for me in our special Métis style. She's teaching me and my friends how to make them. Mine have beautiful flowers on the toes. Flowers. Oh, I could tell you some stories about flowers. I am a storyteller. I know some traditional Métis stories, and I also write my own stories. I tell stories too. My mom calls them tall tales, even though I am short. We don't tell stories in our family, but we do like to sing and dance. Do you like Métis music? It's a blend of styles and it's perfect for dancing. I play the fiddle like my grandfather. When I jig with my aunties and uncles, our feet move so fast, faster and faster until we run out of breath. I am Métis, but I don't know how to jig or fiddle. I've never made bannock or moccasins or picked Saskatoons. I don't know the history of our people. It's never too late. You can learn now. When we pick berries, we walk the same trails and pick them from the same plants our ancestors did. When we thread beads on our needles, we follow patterns and techniques passed down for generations. When our hearts feel the vibrations of the drums, something inside us knows and remembers. I am Métis, but I am still learning. I am still growing. We are still here. I am part of an important community. We are strong. We are resilient. We are still here. I am not Métis, but I like sitting around the fire, hearing your stories and sharing your food and having you as my friend. The notes from the author indicate that the Métis are known as the flower beadwork people, creating designs that mix traditional beadwork styles with European embroidery patterns. Métis fiddle music blends Scottish, French Canadian, and First Nation styles. There was a time the Métis were known as a forgotten people. Their histories weren't recognized, recorded, or passed down. We have the pleasure today of having with us as our speaker, Ms. Chrys Sample, who is the Vice President of the Mikisew Métis Association of the Comox Valley. Following our service, she will be with us as we share coffee and tea and bannock bread and be available to answer any questions you might have. The bannock was baked by members of the Justice Action Team who have coordinated this service today, following the recipe given to us from Chrys. It's her Grandma Laura's bannock recipe. And she brought for us some wild salalberry jam, some spruce tip jam, and some fireweed honey to go with this bannock bread. I first met Chrys in 2015 when we had both moved to the Comox Valley and joined the Comox Valley Newcomers Association. And Chrys went on to become president of that organization and then president of the Newcomers Alumni Association, where she now serves as the vice president. So it's our honor today to have Chrys share with us her history and culture and her experience of being Métis and growing up in northern Saskatchewan.
I just want to say that I am Métis and everything in the book was like, yeah, all of that. And so when Christy talked about beading, I just got new moccasins.
Yeah.
And they're made by Mabel Kelly, one of our members, and she's 92 years old and she just made them. Yeah. And so what's on here, when they talk about the Métis flower, this is the Métis flower. Yeah, so that little book is sweet and special. So thank you for coming and thank you for being willing to learn. I'm kind of trying to make it my business to educate people about who the Métis are. Because when people say, I'm pretty busy, I am pretty busy. I do a lot of things for the Métis as well as being part of the newcomers. And when people ask me to do something, I'm like, oh, I'm busy. And so one day, like a lady, an acquaintance said, what are you always so busy at? I said, well, I'm Métis. And she said, you're a Métis? I didn't know you were Métis. And then that makes you feel like there's something other about being Métis. And that's always how it's been. You always feel like you're not quite in the middle of things, but it's changing. Yesterday, I was at the graduation at Highland School. My granddaughter graduated, but as well as doing that, as part of the Métis Association, I sashed all the Métis kids that were graduating, 6 of them.
Wow.
And for the first time, I've been doing this for 4 years, for the first time, they all said that they would wear their sash. I said, do you want to hold your sash or do you want to wear it over your grad gown? And they all wore it, and I felt like overwhelmed because it's changing. Now you don't have to be ashamed or feel like you're other. Then sometimes you're not white and sometimes you're not First Nations. And you're kind of in the middle, like, and you don't belong to either, but that's changing. So here we go. I'm going to read this part because it's hard. The Canadian Constitution Act of 1982 recognizes 3 distinct groups of Aboriginal people. So First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. So at the beginning, the Métis culture and nationhood is rooted in intermarriages and social connections between Europeans and First Nations during the early North American fur trade period. During the 16 to 1700s, fur traders from France, Scotland, England, and other parts of Europe married First Nations women in what was called country marriage, or marriage entered into according to Aboriginal law. So I totally fit into this because on my mom's side, my grandpa's family was from France, Digier, and my grandma was Chrys, and on my dad's side, my grandpa his family was from Scotland, and my grandma was Dene, which is up north. So I come by it honestly, both sides. The children of these couples were mixed Aboriginal people, but they were not yet Métis. Over time, these individuals chose to marry other mixed Aboriginal individuals. These families created distinct Métis kinship networks, communities, and cultural norms. Gradually, a distinct culture was solidified over generations. Historic Métis communities emerged in the lands now known as British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, and the Northwest Territories, as well as Montana, North Dakota, and Idaho. The term Métis does not encompass everyone with mixed Aboriginal and European heritage. Rather, it refers to a distinctive people who develop their own worldview, customs, way of life, and recognizable group identity that is separate from their First Nations or European ancestors. So it's not accurate to refer to people as Métis solely because they have mixed Aboriginal and European heritage. In the early 1960s, many European men had come to Canada, drawn by the fur trade. Canada was prized for its animal furs, and this was one of the most significant economic ventures on the continent. The furs were used for clothing and hats in Europe. There were two major companies, the Hudson Bay Company, which was based in England, and the Northwest Company based in Montreal. And I think the Hudson Bay Company started in 1620, and then the Northwest Trading Company was in the 1700s, and that was based in Canada here. For the first 200 years, European women did not come to Canada, so European men married First Nations women. European men did not know how to trap or live off the land. And so through marriage, the First Nations women gave them access to the culture of the Aboriginals. They had grandpas, uncles, fathers, brothers who hunted, trapped, and fished, and that's who taught them. I mean, the women did those things too, but that's who taught the European men. So the European women, the Aboriginal women had quite a bit of agency in that time. As the fur trade moved further west, trading posts were established. Families of European and First Nations lived together in these posts, and a culture developed that was neither European or First Nations, but was a fusion of various cultures. People of mixed European and First Nations heritage intermarried over generations and developed a unique culture. As a result, Métis identity and the Michif language began to arise. And so that's how we're Métis. It isn't just that we have a European father and an Aboriginal mother. That was the very beginning. And then when those couples married, when the half-breed couples married, those were the Métis. And they lived in these posts and they formed their own identity, their own culture, their own worldview. So when people say, oh, you're half European, half Aboriginal, you must be Métis. That's not true. That's not true for everyone. So that's a really hard thing for people to understand. And a lot of people, my age, I'm 76, so a lot of people weren't brought up Métis, and they're just discovering or just discovered when they were 40 or older that they're Métis because it was something to be ashamed of. And when I grew up in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, and it was something to be ashamed of. And it was not always easy. When we talked about the bannock and how this little girl got up and had bannock in the morning and went fishing with her dad, this is the story I remember. I have 4 brothers and 4 sisters. So I have a brother a year older and a sister a year younger. And so my brother got up in the morning and said to Mom he had to have a picnic lunch. In Saskatchewan, you get an hour and a half for lunch, where you used to when you were kids. So everybody went home and Mom had lunch. So he said, I have to have a picnic lunch, we're going on a picnic. And so Mom made a sandwich out of bannock and he started to cry. And he said, I can't take bannock to school. Everyone will laugh at me. And as a little boy, I think I didn't go to school yet, so he must have been in grade 1. And so then Mom went next door to Mrs. Logan, and Mrs. Logan, and no one where we lived had bread from the store. Everybody made homemade bread, and Mom made bread 3 times a week. But when you have 9 kids, you end up with a lot of bannock. And so mom went next door to Mrs. Logan, and Mrs. Logan gave mom 2 slices of bread, and then he had a sandwich, and all was good, but he just didn't want to go with Bannock. Yeah, that was, I remember that. I remember that distinctly, and I wasn't very old. Buffalo were used for many purposes, as well as the buffalo hide, the meat. One of the things that really came out of the buffalo was that the Métis people made pemmican. And so pemmican is buffalo that's dry, and then it's pounded into a powder. And then it's mixed with buffalo fat or the marrow from the bones of the meat. And you make it into a paste, and then you dry it. And so the fur traders used that as a really good nutritious form to keep them going, because it didn't take up any room. You could have it as it was, or you could heat it up. And so the Métis people, it was a real economic boom for them to have that, to make that, trade it, sell it. That made them, you know, have some finances of their own. And the fur trade people realized, the Northwest Company, Northwest Trading and the Hudson Bay realized that whoever owned the pemmican business owned the fur trade. And so in, I think 1612, a Scottish governor for the Red River settlement made a law that if you had anything to do with pemmican making, buying, selling, trading, you had to have a license from the Hudson Bay Trading Company. So that caused some conflict between the 2 companies. And there were all these little trade wars going along, and then Cuthbert Grant, he got stopped by the military when he was trying to move some pemmican. And so then Cuthbert Grant gathered up some men, and there was a war, and Cuthbert Grant won. And so then for a few years, it was a real economic boom for the Métis, because they controlled the pemmican business. But what happened was then the fur trade, Hudson Bay Company and the Northwest Trading Company, they amalgamated. So then there was only one person having the pemmican, and so it wasn't a competition anymore. And when they amalgamated, a lot of the Métis people were let go. And so they were pretty resilient, though. What they did was they started some kept trading, some kept with the pemmican, but they also were farmers, they were laborers, they had their own small businesses. And that, when they started fighting with the trade companies and like war-like things, that gave them some agency, the Métis some feeling of nationhood. They had a common ground to protect themselves, and so that was how that started. Between 1820 and 1870, Métis people thrived forcefully as a nation. Many Métis were let go, and so this is what they did. They people in the Red River area where they lived, they became a little nation in themselves. And so they formed a military defense and a distinct lifestyle that was recognizable as Métis. One of the hardest things was the disposition of the Métis land. So there was, the government promised Métis people they could keep their lands. But that didn't happen. They were, I'll read a little bit out of this book. In the mid-1800s, the Métis Nation was a flourishing political and economic force in the Red River region of present-day Manitoba. At the same time, more Euro-Canadian settlers from Ontario began arriving in the Red River area. The settlers looked down upon the Métis and saw their power as a threat to European Canadian settlement. They challenged Métis sovereignty by establishing rules to exclude them and sending out surveyors to plot the land they lived on for future Canadian settlement. They established societies such as Orange Lodges, and they were anti-Catholic and anti-French. Their disdain for both French Canadian and Aboriginal cultures caused them to see the Métis as inferior. In 1867, Canada became a confederation through joining together of the eastern provinces. Shortly thereafter, Canada acquired Rupert's Land from the Hudson Bay Company, a territory composed of present-day Manitoba, Saskatchewan, southern Alberta, southern Nunavut, and northern parts of Ontario and Quebec. This acquisition included most of the Métis homeland. At this time, the Métis constituted an estimated 85% of the total population of the Red River settlement in Rupert's Land. However, more settlers were streaming into Rupert's Land, and it was clear to the Métis that their rights were under threat. And so, having said that, they, all that land was taken away from them. All the Métis, where people lived up there, it was all taken away and they were promised other lands. And so they were given land like 100 miles away, not in a Métis community or not with, particularly with anybody else that they knew. And it wasn't good land. It wasn't good land for farming. They were given scrip, but it was hard. You had to go and apply for your scrip. A lot of people didn't read English. And there were military people there. They had to pass by them before they could get there. And here's what somebody said. It said, the process of the Métis securing their rights to land was very bureaucratic, complex, and corrupt. Métis rights lawyer Jason Madden has called that the largest land swindle in North America, and the Supreme Court of Canada acknowledged in 2013 that the Canadian government failed to uphold its promise to the Métis that they would retain their lands in Manitoba, maintain their lands in Canada and in Rupert's Land. So that didn't happen. And then Christy talked about from the book about the forgotten people. And so what happened was these people got swindled out of their land. And so one of the reasons they're called the forgotten people is they had nowhere to go. And so they lived on road allowances, but you know, like the right of ways kind of, the road allowances, and they were left with nowhere to go. So that wasn't, it was really awful, actually. That's a really awful thing to happen. The Métis were vital players in the fur trade, forming Métis communities as the fur trade spread west. Métis communities have existed in BC for over 200 years. So when, I forgot your name, Heather, when you said the unceded territory of the Comox First Nation, oh, you said that, okay. So you all know this, I'm sure, that the BC, people in BC didn't sign treaties with the government. You know that, so they own the land here. So one of the problems of being Métis and living in British Columbia is we have no land and we have no rights to any land, and we know that. We're never going to have any rights to any land. What we're looking for is self-government more than to, and you know, last week, the Mikisew Métis Nation had Mikisew Métis Association had a meeting with the Comox First Nation. Our board members had a meeting with their board members, and it was so lovely. Because we could just say flat out, we aren't here to look for any of your land. We're not wanting any of your land. We just want to work together in harmony. And it was really well received and really lovely. And so on June 21st on National Aboriginal Day, we're going to partner together, and there's a big celebration down where the music fest is, down by the curl right there. So we're really hopeful for that, because it'd be so nice to just work together. And you know, I don't know any Inuit here. I haven't met any. So that's the three of us, the First Nations, the Métis, and the Inuit. So if you need an Inuit, call me.
Oh, we have a tenant.
You are?
She was from Greenland, yeah.
Oh,
Wow.
nice. Um. The Métis Nation flourished in the 1800s, the Red River region of Manitoba and around Batoche, Saskatchewan. So I'm from right by Batoche. And so, July 16th to the 18th is Batoche Days, and so I'm going and I have two sons. And, so I was having dinner at my son's and I said, listen, I'm going to Batoche. He's like, oh, do you want me to come with you? Oh, well, yes, I do. So we're going. It's really a big celebration. It's like 40,000 people get on this piece of land. It's like huge. Métis nationhood and governance were closely linked to the buffalo hunt. So the buffalo were so important. So on the Métis sash, they would, if they killed whoever killed the buffalo, then they would pick a color in their group. Everybody would have a color, and then you would rip off one of these and then tie it onto your buffalo, so you knew which was yours.
Oh.
The Métis organized a government, advocated and fought for their rights, but were eventually overpowered by Canada and dispossessed of their homeland by the more numerous Euro-Canadian settlers. So in 1865, the people on Rupert's Land, what was Rupert's Land, asked Louis Riel to come and help them make their case or fight against the government to get their land rights. And so Louis came, there was a war, and I don't know if I should call it a war, but at Batoche. And so they had, I can't remember where, there were 3 skirmishes. They were called rebellions, but I'm not calling it a rebellion. So there were 3 different areas, and at Batoche is when the government overpowered the Métis, and Louis Riel was tried and executed in November 16th of 1865. So every November.
1885.
1885, yeah. And so every November 16th is Louis Riel Day. It's celebrated. Métis people have been impacted by colonial oppression, including losing their land and destruction of their communities, exclusion from full participation in the Canadian society and economy, and having their children sent to residential schools, day schools, Indian hospitals, and being taken away through the 60s scoop. I remember when I was in grade 4 or 5, I had these 2 friends, Linda and Susan. And they came to school and said, we got a new baby. Oh, you did? I didn't know you guys were getting a baby. Yeah, and she's 2. And so then the mom came in and walked to the school, and there's this little baby. I thought, oh, that's odd. Yeah, and her name, they changed her name to Joy. And she was a little First Nations baby, the cutest little thing. And of course, I didn't realize at the time, I didn't realize till years and years later, that was the 60s school going on in our little town. There was a residential school in our town. Yeah, and so by the time I got to high school, the kids from the residential school came to our high school too. So we heard, I know you've heard stories. We've heard stories too. So people were often discriminated based on skin color or appearance. So I'm one of the lighter ones in my family. So I had it easier than some of my brothers and sisters. And that was true. And I think that's still true. I think that's still happening. I know it's still happening. The most racist thing that's ever happened to me here in Comox. And I'm old, and so things kind of don't bother me. I'm like, this is life, right? But that was shocking and painful and hurtful. And I just didn't know what to do. And you know what? I moved here because my husband got cancer and he died. And so we had a long time to figure out what I would do when he was gone. And we decided I was coming here because our son that lives here, is a fisherman and he has 3 kids. And so we decided I would come here. And so, so that day that racist incident happened, I'm like, you know, when you're married, you always just go and find your husband and tell him this is what happened, or help me do this, or what should I do, that kind of thing. And I just didn't know what to do. But I phoned my son and I said, where are you? And he said, oh, Luke, that's my grandson. Luke and I are at the boat. And I'm like, well, can I come there? And he's like, yeah. So I did. He was here. And so I did, and I told him what happened, and he said, you don't even have to tell me her name. I know who she is. That's her, not you. But you know what affected me? It was, anyways, I went to a counselor. I found a counselor and I went for 8 sessions because it was really hard. That it's not something you're expecting. It wasn't, I was surprised. Anyway. There's been so they're talking about all these things that happened, residential school, Indian hospitals. So this has led to intergenerational trauma, which is exemplified by the loss of culture and language, mental health, addiction challenges, and socioeconomic struggles. Métis people have formed governments to support their people and advocate for Métis rights. So the overall umbrella of our Métis community is Métis Nation of BC. And then there are 39 chartered communities in British Columbia, 7 on the island. So Victoria, Duncan, Port Alberni, Nanaimo, Courtney Comox, Campbell River, and Powell River. So that's the communities here. And our community has 452 members. Wow. Yeah, and you know what? There's like in the 20, what's this last census, 2022, I think, 2020. I think there were 2,700 Métis people. And of course, not everyone identifies as Métis, even if they are Métis. Some people don't, but yeah. And I held at 2 schools. So Lake Trail School, they have 162 Aboriginal kids. So whether they're First Nations or Métis, and Highland has 142. Yeah. So sometimes I go and do things for them, like Red Dress Day, and yeah, things like that. So Métis people have formed government. So that's the Métis Nation of BC. And the Canadian Constitution of 1982 acknowledges Métis people as one of the Aboriginal peoples of Canada. Court cases such as the Pauli and Daniels decisions have helped Métis people to reestablish their rights in the eyes of the legal system, including their rights to practice their culture and to govern their own people. Many Métis people are rediscovering and claiming their cultural heritage. So I just want to give you a little look at this book. So once a month, we have a luncheon for our seniors and elders. And so I've been using this book, and it means we do things together, we help each other. And it's divided into 8 sections, kind of like a workbook. And so every month we go over one of these, and it's so amazing to me how many people didn't know they were Métis and are happy to learn about being Métis. And so when I first joined the Métis here, I was the secretary of the group. And so at the first annual general meeting, I had to ask everyone their names. I go around and what's your name? And it's this man. And I say, oh, what's your name? He said, Milt Swain. I looked at him and I'm like, Milt was your French teacher, Mr. Wilson, in grade 10. He's like, yeah. I'm like, oh, I sat behind you. I sat behind you in grade 10. And he said, did you always know you were Métis? I'm like, yes. He's like, I said, did you? He said, no, my dad only told me when I was 40. Yeah. So anyways, we're catching up now. So the other thing I wanted to talk about was our culture. So this past weekend, the Mikisew had a cultural camp, and we were at Camp Gilwell out by Nymph Falls. And we had like 130 people come. And because I'm old, I didn't have to sleep there overnight, I could just stay late and go home. But these are the things that identify us. So the Métis sash is one thing. The ribbon skirt. Does anyone know Bryce Mercady? So Bryce is the founder of the Nipissing Métis here, and he lent me his shirt. This is his ribbon shirt.
Nice.
Yeah. And so here's some beadwork, the orange shirt, the flower, and this is Moose Hide Day. Do you know about Moose Hide Day?
No.
So I see you know about Moose Hide Day?
I thought one.
You do. So Moose Hide Day is kind of in conjunction with Missing, Murdered and Women and the Red Shirt Day. And it's to give agency to men and other people to look at abuse of women and children. Does that sum it up? Yeah. And then this is our infinity flag. What I forgot to tell you was that after Cuthbert Grant had a little skirmish and won over the Hudson Bay Company, then they raised the flag. It was the first time the flag had been raised, and that was the first flag that was strictly Canadian, and it's more than 100 years older than our Canadian flag. So I have a little flag here on the Bannock table. So this is our flag. So, at the culture camp, that's what I'll tell you. So we had beading, embroidery, we had archery. We have a lot of kids, not a lot, but we have kids, and we particularly have a lot of boys. And so we have boys like from about 4 to 21 or 22. And they're just out there having the time of their lives. And so, I forget the right word for this, but I'll explain it. So it's a man who came from Langley and he brought a dead beaver. And he skinned it and then cut it up and showed the kids how to, all of us, how to clean the hide. I don't think beavers are called hide, though, right? Skin. Oh, pelt, thank you. And so that was pretty interesting. And the archery was really interesting. We had jigging. We made bannock over the fire. So in Saskatchewan, you bake bannock. But in BC, you fry bannock. But when you're outside and you have a fire, it's baked on a stick. So all of those. And so my grandson, when he was 12, we lived on the Sunshine Coast and we had a bed and breakfast. And so he would come for the summer and cook with us for the bed and breakfast. And one day he said, I was making bannock, and he said, Grandma, you know what you should do? You should make the bannock, but cut a hole in the bannock and put the bacon grease in there. And then with the rest of the bacon grease that's left over, you could make a candle. It would just smell great in here. It would smell like bacon. And then you could have bacon in your bannock. He just thought that was the best idea. And so I went to a ladies' event at Paul River with other Métis women. And on the way home on the ferry, there were 3 Aboriginal women, First Nations women, sitting. And so I went and plunked down beside one of them and said, can we talk about bannock? And they laughed and said, yes. And one lady said, she's the bannock queen. I said, okay. So I said, I'm from Saskatchewan and I want to learn how to make fried bannock. They call it fry bread. How to make fry bread. And she said, okay, this is what you do. But the lady sitting beside me, I said, I just know how to make big bannock. And the lady sitting beside me said, why don't we get together? I want to learn how to make baked bannock and I can teach you how to make fried bread. So she lives in Campbell River. So I took myself over to Campbell River and I went to her house and we made baked bannock and fried bread. So I'm going to try making fried bread. So the Métis family structure has always been the backbone of Métis communities and has provided the foundational relationship for economic, political, social, and cultural activities and alliances. The family provides a sense of belonging and supports the well-being of each individual. The concept of all of us working together. So means we're interconnected and relationships we share with all things is central to the Métis understanding of the social responsibilities and obligations held between members of the family and community. I told you I came from a really big family. My aunt and uncle lived across the street. They had 7 kids. My other aunt and uncle lived across the tracks. They had 5 kids. So you, all of us, could go to any of those 3 houses and stay there for 3 days and nobody cared. You could just go there. And you just wore your cousin's clothes, and if anybody got in trouble, you were in trouble too. Didn't matter which mother it was. And I was born at home. When I was born, we lived in Hawkeye, Saskatchewan, which isn't really a place anymore, it was a hamlet. And on my birth certificate, it says section 126 TP 50, so section 126 township 50. And so my grandma was a midwife, and so we were born at home. And my grandma was also a healer, so I remember from a young age going into the Saskatchewan, she called it the bush. Come on, girls, we're going in the bush. And I have allergies, and so she would first get some willow, we'd go down by the water, and she would get some willow branches and cut them off and then strip the bark, and she would boil the bark. And then she would cool it, and then she would put my hands in it, because I had eczema on my hands, and would take the itch and the sting out. And if you had, and we picked Seneca roots, we picked wild mint, rose hips, we make tea, and she would make medicines and salves all the time. And if you had a cold, oh man, this was the recipe. Brown paper on your chest, and then, mustard powder. Yeah, mix it with water, and then she puts that on the brown paper, and then she puts another piece of brown paper on, and then your undershirt, and that was that. There were salt, she would put salt in a sock or tie it in something, and if you had a cramp or whatever, she would put that on you. We had all kinds of remedies. But if anybody got hurt where we lived, they would come to grandma, and sometimes grandma would go and stay there for a couple of days and help whatever was going on, so. Yeah. Many components of Métis culture, such as beading, dances, music, and weaving, are linked to family traditions. When Métis people were dispersed from their homeland and lived outside of Métis communities, the family continued to be the primary vehicle for passing on cultural knowledge and ways of being. The Métis have extended multi-generational family structures known as kinship networks. Kinship networks are one of the most significant factors in structuring Métis communities. Extended family members often have roles in raising children who grow up surrounded by networks of aunts, uncles, cousins, and grandparents. Most people often take pride in tracing their roots back multiple generations to the Red River era before, and in doing so, finding connections within the larger Métis nation. So when I went to that ladies group, we all took our family trees and put them on the wall. And I'm looking at everybody's, and I saw one that said this: Antoine Lambert married Marie, and then in brackets, Salto, which is a nation of Indians, right? So no last name, she was just a Salto Indian. And I'm like, I have that. I have that too. And then I looked at someone else's and had the same thing. And the lady that I said, look, we have this, she said, the Red River area wasn't that big. We're all related. My grandson, Luke, is the 8th generation, and then my son Quince is the 7th, so I'm the 6th generation. And so, but we can go back to 1750 on my on my mom's dad's side, and on my dad's side, even further back. I always do my Métis heritage. You only have to, when you join the Métis Nation, you have to prove your Métis heritage. So we use my mom's because I knew all the stuff. But now I know dad's stuff too. So, yeah. So I think that's all I have to say. So if you have any questions, I'm good with that.
And we'll do that at that.
No, we don't. Okay. So when you're having your coffee, look at those. I forgot to talk about those. Those were sent out by Métis Nation of BC and it just, and on the back, it talks about them. So they're really handy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I take them to the schools when I go to the schools. Yeah.
Some of you heard me mess around with Red River Dig when you came in. I don't know if you know it or not, but I'm learning it.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Take this off. You want to? Yeah. Well, what's that? You can use that
Just
one.
turn it.
or- This one's noisy to take off. What did you say that?
Hi, I don't like to talk into this now. So I'm Stephen, very nice to hear the presentation by Chris. I used to teach socials 8, 9, and 10. And it was very interesting to hear the discussion that Chris had. And my favorite character in teaching social studies was Louis Riel. And it was nice to hear more details about it, so thank you, Chris. So joys and concerns, am I too close here?
Okay.
Is it better? You hear me now? Yeah, so joys and concerns are the heart, for many of us are the heartbeat of our fellowship. And we invite you to come up if you wish to tell us if you have joy or concern. And is something happened in your life and you want to tell us about it, and just do the following, take a apple and
Well, it states there, our collection is to support our fellowship, which we all love and care for so much. And the seal almost can go towards people's pledges, and the loose change that occurs in their contribution goes to our support of the caravan. And
Thank you for that. My name is Celia. I'm about to give the closing words. And the closing words are from Richard Metis. What comes from spirit? What comes from spirit is beyond time, beyond place. It exists in another realm, and when I get in touch with it, when I get in touch with my essential self, I am transported, altered, changed, and empowered, and I become less a human being working than a spirit moving. This is powerful. This is truth. This is spiritual. Thank you.
One of our closing traditions is to form a circle, as you're able, and take hands with the person next to you, and we'll sing now Carry the Flame.
how you do it? Thumbs left.
How it works.
How it works. However it works.
How it works. Thanks for going.
Of peace and love until we meet again. Carry the flame of peace and love until we meet again. And we shall see the world of light and the world of joy. Carry the flame of peace and love until we meet again. Notice I put the words off. Sometimes the words down at the bottom.
When people are standing, that's a good one, that's a good one.